Simon, welcome to Toronto Mic'd.
Simon?
Thank you very much, Mike. Honored to be here and grateful you asked me on.
Have you heard that song before?
I did because one of CBC's ENG editors, electronic news gathering editors, Naomi Robinson, sings it all the time whenever I'm cutting a story back in the editing bay.
I grew up watching TVO, the kids programming on TVO, like Polka Dot Door and Dr. Snuggles, and I could go on Jeremy the Bear. And one of the great shows I would watch as a like in the late 70s on TV Ontario was Simon in the Land of Chalk Drawings. So when Simon Dingley was going to make his Toronto Mike debut, I said, okay, I have the perfect song for him. Do you remember, did you ever watch this show? Is this a show that ever caught your attention, Simon?
Never. I'd never even heard the song. I mean, obviously I know about TVO. Everybody does.
You might be just ahead of it. Like, I feel like this is a mid-70s thing.
Yeah, but I know it's very popular.
You're probably sick of everybody singing the song to you. So you, my friend, I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about your start. We're going to walk through your career, but not to bury the lead, as you guys say in the news business, but you have retired from CBC News after what, 30 plus years as a reporter and producer?
30 years at CBC. Prior to that, I was at CTV News in Montreal and Global News in Toronto. And prior to that, I worked for CKO All News Radio in Toronto and CJAD 800 in Montreal. They were radio stations.
Okay, so that's like a teaser. We're gonna walk through all that, but I'm gonna ask you a big question off the top, which is why now? And please, this is what I'm always curious about. Like, I just had this conversation, an exit interview with somebody who's like, yeah, packages were offered and I jumped on it. This is Mark Zwolinski from the Toronto Star. He's like, it was time. There's a package I can take. Like, tell me what prompted you to retire from CBC.
I didn't want to be one of those old guys who hangs around and prevents younger people from having a career. And I know people did this for me when I was younger. And last fall, when my boss told us that there were likely to be cuts at the CBC, and I knew that 4 young people in my unit, the Ontario Bureau of the National, were likely to be impacted. I thought, well, I don't want these kids to lose their jobs. They're all smart young people. They're polite. They're respectful. And after a brief talk with my wife, she said, yeah, absolutely. So it was a very easy decision to go. Nobody at CBC pushed me. I'm very happy to do it. And I'm grateful for the 30 years I've had at CBC.
Well, I've been asking around. I don't think anybody would push you because it sounds like you were a valued member.
Who told you that? My mom?
Well, your wife told me that. So, and your wife, we should point out, is also a CBCer. Jeannie's with the CBC Business Bureau there.
Yes, Jeannie Lee is my wife, and she has anchored CBC's business news for a long, long time. I'm not allowed to say how many years.
Is she considering retirement? What's going on there?
I don't want to push her, so I know everybody's been asking her that. She's getting sick of being asked that. So the last thing
She's like, I'm too young to retire.
Yeah, exactly. She says, I'm only 27. So I'm going to leave it up to her. Whenever she decides to go is fine.
Okay, very selfless of you as I hear that reason. And I've heard that from others, and I always think that's very selfless that you would actually basically say, okay, I can afford to go away now, and that means somebody gets an opportunity, a younger, more junior person gets an opportunity. I think that's very selfless of you.
You know, I'm no hero. It was a really easy decision. Our money guy told us, yes, you can afford to go. And so if the circumstances have been different, maybe I wouldn't. But it was really not a hard decision. And I've done everything I hope to achieve. I've been very lucky in my career. So hopefully these young people will have great careers too.
Well, let's see who gets in office here next election. Hopefully, any apprehension, like I just wonder, did that play a role at all? Like that essentially, I don't know, probably in 2025, but at some point very soon, there might be a new government in office that is less, like basically has said, I think, will cut funding to the CBC. I think he's all but said that exactly, right?
Yes, Pierre Poilievre has promised, the federal Conservative leader has promised to cut funding to the CBC. And I mean, I can't deny that was in the back of my head. Might as well go now because these things could happen. We can't deny this might happen, but we'll just have to wait and see.
I feel like you might look back and say, oh, I got out just in time. Like this might be the greatest timing ever. You might be in good shape here. So congrats on your retirement.
Thank you.
30 years. That's incredible. And you mentioned your start. So like when did you realize you wanted to be a journalist? Like when in your young life, Simon, did you say, hey, I'm gonna be a reporter?
When I was a little boy, I would get up and listen to the radio, what was then CFRB 1010, now News Talk 1010, and I would listen to the morning radio and hear the news with Torben Wittrup, Jack Dennett, all the greats, and I would listen to the sports with Bill Stevenson at 5 to 7 and 5 to 8 each morning, and it just got me hooked. And I guess it was also a way for me to stay close to my father, who I didn't see a lot because he worked really long hours.
Okay.
So I really treasured those times, and that's when I was hooked on radio.
You mentioned Bill Stevenson. I will tell you, I was hanging out with Dave Hodge on Friday night.
He's a good man.
Yeah, I was in Hamilton for Tom Wilson has a new musical that was at the Aquarius Theater in Hamilton, and I was there. And I realized as I was going to this thing, I'm like, who are all the Hamilton people I know? And I was thinking Ralph Benmergui.
Damien Cox.
Cox has moved to Etobicoke, though.
He's my neighbor.
I knew he was close. Okay, you guys are right just above me here. Once in a while, I get you guys to drop south of Lakeshore and visit. But he's your neighbor. So direct neighbor or just down the street?
One street over.
Okay, that's wild. Is he friendly to you, Mr. Damien? I like him very much,
Yep.
but people find him a little prickly.
I like Damien very much, and I respect his writing. I've never had an issue with Damien. Whenever we run into each other on the streets, we always stop and chat and talk about the business. I have tremendous respect for Damien Cox and the Toronto Star.
Now I'm wondering, why wasn't Damien at the Tom Wilson musical? I feel like that would be his jam. But Dave Hodge was there. Okay, so you are listening to CFRB, and you just said, hey, I want to do that.
I became addicted to radio, Mike. Not only did I listen to CFRB in the mornings, in the evenings I would listen to CFRB 6:30 news package from 6:30 to 6:40, and then the sports came on from 6:40 to 6:50, and then late at night I'd listen to The World Tonight on CFRB 11 to 11:20, and then the late night sports 11:20 to 11:30 with Dave Quinn and Fred Locking, and many others, and Sunil Joshi. These are all people that I grew up listening to, and there's just something about it that made me want to be a part of being involved in covering the world.
Now that you're retired, what is your thoughts on the fact that station, which does now go by News Talk 1010, but still CFRB, the call letters, that doesn't even have a news division anymore? Like, there is no news department at 1010 now. Like, how do you feel about that?
I feel it's terrible. They used to bill themselves as Ontario's news leader, and it's a shadow of its former self. And I don't blame the staff, and I understand, of course, the management's reasons for cutting back. Radio is very difficult these days, especially private radio. Margins are thin, so it's just an unfortunate situation. And I feel for all my radio colleagues who I grew up with and learned from. I dreamed of someday working at CFRB. I never did. I wound up working at their sister station in Montreal, but I'm sure you want to talk about that after.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. We'll keep it chronological. But what's happening now with this, you worked for CBC, so the public broadcaster, but, CTV, Bell Media, they got a CP24, and they have CTV / was CFTO. I guess they call it CTV Toronto now. Mm-hmm. And they have CFRB, News Talk 1010. And what I think is inevitable at some point, maybe in 2024, maybe the announcement comes tomorrow. I don't know, Simon, but I think it's inevitable that all three will just come from the same newsroom.
Well, they're already doing that.
Is that right? So is CP24 and CTV Toronto one newsroom right now?
I'll give you an example. If you listen to News Talk 1010's weekend newscast, they're from CP24. They're simulcast. And so what you have is people making reference using television terms like look here and see this on radio. Also, in the afternoons on News Talk 1010, the newscasters are the CFTO or CTV Toronto anchors, so they're already doing it. So I think it's a fait accompli. It's going to happen at some point.
That's awful. That's like when you find out there is no radio broadcast of this baseball game, for example. It'll be the simulcast of the television broadcast. Two different mediums, two different styles. You can't just. Do you remember? I know you do, but when 1050 before it went to TSN radio, they were just simulcasting. I think they were just simulcasting CP24.
Yes, they were for a while. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's the way I believe radio is going. I mean, the kids these days, when I tell them I listen to radio, they stare at me blankly because they don't. Yeah. They listen to podcasts. They stream. So it's unfortunate. And
that's true. Okay, so I have a 22-year-old. And I'm actually, so we're going to get you to Montreal in a moment. I'm going to be in Montreal tomorrow. I'm going to be picking up my daughter. She's at McGill. So hello, Michelle. I'll see you tomorrow. But Michelle listens to zero terrestrial radio, and my 22-year-old son listens to zero terrestrial radio. And I won't even tell you about the 10 and the 8-year-old. They're going to ask you what a radio is.
Yes.
So it's such a wild time.
I must say, Mike, I still am addicted to radio news. I listen to CBC 6:30 a.m. radio news, the 7 p.m. national radio news, and I still listen to News Talk 1010 at 8 in the morning. And then in the evening, I listen to CFRB at 5 to 5:05 for their local news, CBC at 5:30 local news, and then Your World Tonight at 6 o'clock, which is not to plug the CBC here, but it's a tremendous newscast.
I listen to it as a podcast, though. Yep. Like, I can show you my podcast app right now.
I do too.
And there's the one that's the hourly one. I think it's 10 minutes. I get that as a podcast. So on demand, I can hear the most recent 10 minutes, and I get the half hour once a day.
I'm addicted to it. Even when I'm overseas, I listen to it. Susan Bonner and Tom Harrington are the hosts, and they're essential for me. Even though now I'm retired, I'm still listening to it, and I don't think I'll ever get out of that habit.
That's FOTM Tom Harrington to you, Simon. Okay, from now on, I want proper designations here.
Okay, sorry about that.
Hell of a singer, that Tom Harrington.
He is. I've known Tom for 40 years. We worked together. We knew of each other in Montreal. We socialized there.
Okay, so let's get going here because I realize I could spend hours with you here. Okay, so it begins at CKO.
Yes.
Tell me about, how did you get that gig, and just give me a little taste of what that gig was like back in the 80s.
CKO, I started as an intern, and I am very grateful that I learned from tremendous broadcasters there like John Anderson, Susan Flory, Bernie McNamee, people like
who's
that.
here Monday?
Oh, Bernie is? Oh, fantastic. He's a good friend of mine.
Okay, that's wild coincidence. So technically you're back to back.
Yes.
Wink, wink. Okay.
So CKO, it was not perhaps the most professional radio station. It was all news, and we were flying by the seat of our pants. One of my older colleagues at CKO called it CK0 for the number of listeners they had at certain times of the day. But it gave me a start, and I will be forever grateful. And I'm still friends with many people from CKO, including Paul Smith, who is a bigwig at ETM Voice Talent.
I love the name. Just please don't hesitate. I notice with some guests, they're hesitant to name drop, where I'm actually, I need to know the names. Like, I need to know who influenced you, who inspired you, who did you work with, who you're still friendly with. Like, so don't hesitate. Okay. I love that very much. Okay, so you're at CKO Toronto, and what is next for you? Is it global? Where's next?
No, after CKO Toronto, I was quickly promoted to CKO's Parliament Hill station in Bureau in Ottawa. And I was covering mostly local news and anchoring the local news there and trying to get better. I probably wasn't very good, Mike. I probably needed to work on my skills, and I think that really helped me. And it was great to leave Toronto and live in Ottawa for a year. It was a tremendous experience. After CKO Ottawa, I came back to Toronto, and then I realized my career was in a rut. And I had been to Montreal on a brief vacation. I thought, why don't I apply to the radio station that I listened to there? And that was CJAD 800 Montreal. The news director was Gord Sinclair, son of the famous Gordon Sinclair. And you may not know this, but Gord and Gordon Sinclair grew up here in Etobicoke. So when I told him I was from Etobicoke, I think that created a natural sort of a bond.
I'm looking for Marilyn Bell. Okay, I'm just because now that I realize we're both, although I only moved to Etobicoke 10 years ago, but Marilyn Bell is a Lakeshore legend, and I understand she's still with us. This is good news. She's in her, I think, late 80s. But I want to talk to Marilyn Bell. So if you as a reporter, see, now that you're an FOTM, I'll be assigning you tasks. I literally just assigned Steve Paikin a task and told him I want Bob Ray in the basement. And he's like, oh, that's a tall order. He lives in New York at UN. I said, Steve, I'm assigning you this task. Steve Paikin has delivered, and Bob Ray is in the calendar to visit the basement.
Bob Ray's a good man. Funny story. Bob and I get along fine now, but I'm sure he wasn't happy about one story I covered when I was at Global. The NDP was trailing in the polls in 1990, and I did a stand-up covering his campaign, and I said, in baseball and politics, 3 strikes and you're out. And that caught a lot of people's attention.
He's had a wild career when you look back, and it's not over yet by any means. But I am looking forward to the chat. And I don't know how you're going to find me, Marilyn Bell. I'm just assigning you this. In retirement, you might have some time on your hands.
I will.
Okay. So you go to Montreal.
Yes. I was at CJD in Montreal, as I mentioned. I was anchoring local news and reporting local news. And it was a tremendous experience. It gave me a fresh start, which I needed. after starting my career in Toronto. And I met a lot of people, and I learned a lot. Eventually, I managed to be hired for weekends only by CFCF 12, which is the CTV Montreal affiliate, and that's where I cut my TV teeth. And I'm friends with people from that station even today, and it was an amazing experience. I went from I all of a sudden was covering big events, political events.
Well, I'm going to ask you about a tragic event.
Mm.
I was hoping you could share with me what it was like to cover the Montreal massacre in 1989, because you're at CTV Montreal.
Yes.
What do you remember about that horrific happening?
Well, here's the thing. I was actually in Toronto on December 6th, 1989, and I was watching the CBC evening news called NewsHour at the time, and I saw the bulletin, and I suddenly realized I had to get back to Montreal, so I booked myself on a 7 a.m. flight the next day. The next day I arrived in Montreal and I was immediately assigned to find the suspect's home, Marc Lepine. I try not to use his name, but I will in this case. And my cameraman and I, Terry Wong, we found where he lived in a part of East End Montreal, and it had what they call a walk-up mic. I'm sure you know what that is, the steps going up the side.
Right.
And I'll never forget shivering and in shock when I was able to look into his apartment and see the living room where he probably plotted to kill 14 innocent women. I've never forgotten that, just because they were women. And I stood there, and my cameraman was shooting it, and I was in shock, thinking, "This is where this guy planned to kill these women. What is wrong with our society?" It's a story I'll never forget. I was not at École Polytechnique the night before. My wife, my girlfriend at the time, Jeannie Lee, was.
And this is where you meet Jeannie?
We met at CTV Montreal, yes. Yeah, we'd actually met prior to me going there, but...
Okay, we'll get back to Jeannie, but
Sure.
yeah, please, because this is horrific. You're literally staring into the apartment that belonged to the gunman, whose name we won't use now. But and you're looking at the space, and you're like, this is where he's like strategizing. He's plotting his plan to murder women because they are women.
Yeah,
that's horrific.
Awful.
And how did you? So you just did good old-fashioned detective work, reporter work, to find out which apartment belonged to this gunman.
Yeah, you call your sources, and you ask other people who might know. And I think I may have asked a more well-known reporter than mine, Robert Viro, where I might find where Lepine lived. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use his name. And I think it was Robert Viro who said, call this guy, and he was a crime reporter with Le Journal de Montréal. And I think that's how I got the address, but I can't absolutely be certain. It's been a long time.
So your contacts, your Rolodex, if you will. I don't know if you still have a Rolodex.
Electronic Rolodex, yes.
Right. Like, I always think, because in my little, and I'm no journalist here, but I often am asked about, can somebody who knows this, somebody who worked that, and I realize I actually have this electronic Rolodex that you're talking about, and I can very quickly connect the right people, and it's kind of fun to watch it, to do it. But how vital is that electronic Rolodex to do what you do?
It's incredibly vital, because reporters every day face a time crunch. You're assigned a story at 9 or 10 in the morning, and you've got to not only track down this person, but convince them to talk. And if they refuse to talk, you've got to find other people who are willing to talk. Right. So the more time you can save by having cell phone numbers, by having email addresses, the better it is. I learned very early to take down names and numbers. And what I would do when I was living in Montreal is I'd watch CBC and CTV's 6 o'clock newscast, and I'd write down the newsmakers that the more experienced reporters would interview. And then during my off time, I would track them down and get their numbers in case I needed to reach them in the future. Other reporters do this too. It wasn't just me.
No, but you did it well, and it served you well throughout your career. Again, I'm gonna like prompt for certain stories, and then and if there's any other stories that strike you, just this is the time, man. This is the exit interview. Okay, we got 3 decades to cover here.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. But I want to talk about some other stories you covered in Montreal, and then I'm going to give you some gifts for making the trek here. Maybe some congratulatory happy retirement gifts here.
Is there money involved?
It's practically, it's better than money. It's beer, it's lasagna, it's better than money. You reminded me, just before I get back to a couple more Montreal stories, you reminded me before we press record that we had met at the Steve Buffery retirement, and I had forgot I met you.
Yes, the Beezer. He's a great man, and he lives here in Etobicoke.
He's in the Etobicoke Sports Hall of Fame.
Yes, he deserves it.
With Marilyn Bell. I don't know. And Gus Ryder.
Yes.
I'm thinking of all the and Cliff Lumsden.
Oh, yes, yes.
So
of course.
Cliff, this is what I learned. So, because Lumsden Park is very close to us here, and that's where Biff Naked walks her dog, and I sometimes see Biff there. Did you know Biff lives in Mimico?
I did not. Shared a flight with her to Newfoundland once. I did not know she even lived in Toronto.
Well, she's been here, I think, for about 5 years now, but she spent 35 years in Vancouver.
Yes, that's where I thought she lived. So she was lovely when I chatted with her on the flight to.
She belongs to us now. She is
FTON.
lovely. She's all Irish, right? And she's an FOTM for sure. But Cliff Lumsden and Marilyn Bell were coached by Gus Ryder.
Oh.
And they were both long-distance swimmers. And then, of course, Marilyn Bell, the first person to swim across Lake Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where I'm going with this, because Marilyn Bell, when she finished her swim, I think Gus was worried about all the press that were there, and he moved the finale of the swim, was to Sunnyside.
Oh.
So she finishes at Sunnyside here in West Toronto. And I'm here to tell you, my friend, because you're living not very far from the Great Lakes Brewery, that the Sunnyside Session IPA is now available, and that's my summer beer. And I actually don't have one for you, but I do have fresh craft beer for you, Simon, from Great Lakes Brewery.
Thank you very much. I can't wait to show this to Sean O'Shea, my friend at Global News. He and I share beer pictures.
I know Sean O'Shea. I want Sean O'Shea on Toronto Mike. Here's another. This is I think it's easier assignment than the Marilyn Bell.
Yes, I can get Sean for you very easily. He's in Albania right now.
Okay, when he gets back from Albania, you know what's funny? This is funny. I think that when I hear Albania, I think of the foreign exchange student from The Simpsons. In the Simpsons episode, there was a foreign exchange, and they got a kid from Albania, and there's my Albania reference point. So I need to improve that. Okay, so Simon, we still got you in Montreal here.
Yes.
You're not escaping that easily. So there was a huge fire at the Montreal headquarters of the English rights lobby group Alliance Quebec.
Yes.
Tell me about this and some of the footage you were able to capture.
It's a great story. One of the things about being a reporter is you have to go to the scene, and that's where the story is. Reporters who stay in the station or don't leave, I feel they don't actually get the gist of the story. It was a weekend, I believe, and for your listeners who don't know, Alliance Quebec protects the rights of English-speaking people in Quebec. Anyway, in December 1988, I believe it was.
Sorry, I think it's 89.
89, my apologies. Someone set fire to it, and this was during a time when linguistic tensions were very high. Anyway, my cameraman and I were shooting the outside of the building, and all of a sudden a young woman walked by, and she asked me what had gone on, and I told her, and she went, "Oh my God, I work here." And she started to go in, and I said, "Can we follow with you?" And she said, "Sure." And this is gold for a TV crew because there were no police guarding the building for some reason. I think it was because it was the holidays. They were short-staffed. So we went up, and my cameraman got tremendous footage. And a good part of the Alliance Quebec building offices was destroyed. Anyway, that night we led with it on CTV's local newscast at 6 o'clock. And then, of course, CTV National News wanted the story as well, so I recut it for them. It was just tremendous pictures, Mike.
Shout out to FOTM Lloyd Robertson.
Okay, I've got a Lloyd Robertson story.
Let's
I can just tell you.
Let's do it.
When I was working at CFCF 12, one day the phone rings, and it's a woman, and she said, "I'd like to speak to Lloyd Robertson, please." So I said, "Well, ma'am, he's not here. He's in Toronto."
Right.
And she goes, "What?" And I said, "Yes, he works out of Toronto. That's where the National News is from." And she says to me, "How the F can he be in Toronto when I watched him on my news last night here in Montreal?"
That's hilarious.
And she hung up the phone on me.
Send her to agent court there. Okay. So that's a wild story. All these stories I love so much. Okay. So when you're covering, though, this fire at the Alliance Quebec, you actually had to testify at the inquiry, right? So you shoot this wild footage. You get all this footage. And you had to, because I guess you're in there and you got this video.
We probably shouldn't have been allowed in there.
Yeah.
There should have been yellow police tape up, but there wasn't for whatever reason. So there was an inquiry in Quebec as to how
did Simon get inside? I think that's what they called it. It's like the Dublin inquiry.
It was more than just me. There were other questions too in the inquiry, but they definitely wanted to know how an English TV crew got inside. And I remember the Montreal Gazette interviewing me saying, "How could this happen?" And I said, "There was nobody there." So it was regarding security.
Yeah, you're like, "Just doing my job, ma'am. Just doing my job."
And they let me testify in English too.
Okay, good. How is your French?
Ce n'est pas mal. Je ne suis pas bilingue, mais je parle français pas mal. Passable.
So better than mine.
Yeah. One of the best things I ever did was move to Quebec because I improved my French dramatically. My wife would laugh at that, of course, because she is fluently bilingual.
She's better than you.
But la langue française, c'est très nécessaire pour le pays du Canada.
I have this rare situation where my 4 kids are bilingual.
Oh, great.
And I got grade 9 French. So I'm like a philosopher. I am, you are. You know what I mean?
A friend of mine many years ago had tossed out his 2 lines of French when I was in Mexico, and I met a young woman there who was from Quebec City. Yeah. And my friend was feeling ignored because we were chatting in French. And my friend said, "Tu aimes les beignets? You like donuts?" And then he said to her, "Tu es en l'autobus?" And the girl looked at him and I and just walked away.
It's just 2 lines. Okay. Okay. I realize your next stop is not Toronto CBC. It is global. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so before I'm not done with you in Montreal yet. Okay. I love Montreal. Like I said, I'm literally, and the times are a bit funny, wink, wink. But I guess I was in Montreal, as now I realize. Okay, Simon, I got to keep myself honest here. But I'm gonna play a little song, just enough to maybe get us deplatformed here. Just a little bit of something here, just to warm me up, Simon. 30 years, my friend. What a run.
Thank you.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be.
You Beatles fan, Simon?
Just a bit. Yes, I'm a huge Beatles fan. If you were in my basement, Mike, I've got Beatles posters all over it. I've seen Paul McCartney live 6 times. I've watched the movie Help 17 times.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm a huge Beatles fan.
Do I have this correct that in 1989, when you're at CTV Montreal, you get to interview Paul McCartney?
It wasn't a solo interview. It was a news conference. And yes, I did. I got to ask him a couple of questions. Interesting thing about that news conference is all the French radio stations were there, and they carried the entire news conference, which was in English, of course, because Paul doesn't speak any French.
Right.
But it's very rare for a station like CKC, CKVL, CGMS to carry an English language broadcast. But yeah, it was a thrill to be at that news conference. And Paul actually said one of my questions was very good, so I was thrilled about that.
Good question, mate. Is that what he said? Or yeah.
The Tears for Fears album, Sowing the Seeds of Love, had just come out. And it was very Beatlesque, and I said,
it's the song backwards, right? It's I'm the Wal. Was it no? I'm the Walrus. What is the song backwards? No, Across the Universe.
I don't know.
I think it's Across the Universe.
Maybe, but I asked Paul. I said, "How do you feel about Tears for Fears with their song Sowing the Seeds of Love?" And he goes, "Good question, mate."
That is a good question.
You know, at first I wasn't too happy about it, but then I was chuffed when he found out it was a tribute to the Beatles by Tears for Fears.
Yeah, I think I played them both back to back a few times because it's Across the Universe, and then yeah, well, okay, so great question, and those are the kind of questions I would ask. Like, you know, you have a moment with an idol of yours, don't waste it asking the same question everybody else. You have those things. Like, if I get Paul McCartney in the basement, I'm gonna have these questions. I'm gonna ask him about Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live. I know what I'm gonna ask him about.
You got to get him.
Can you do that? No. Marilyn Bell, then Sean O'Shea, and then Paul McCartney.
Sean O'Shea and his wife Irene Bacaric, who is also a well-known media person in Toronto.
Sold. We'll get them both on together if they want. They'll do it for the lasagna because, Simon, you're going to take home with you a Palma Pasta frozen lasagna. It's in my freezer right now.
Thank you very much.
And you're going to love it, and you're going to let me know. And by the way, since you're in Etobicoke, June 27, write this down, June 27 from 6 to 9 p.m., I'm hosting TMLX 15, the 15th Toronto Mike Listener Experience. And good FOTMs like you just wander over. I mean, that's down the street from the Costco on Queen Elizabeth Boulevard, not too far from Royal York and
I know it.
Yep. Queensway or whatever. Yeah, that's right. So wander over June 27 and just hang out with good FOTMs because Palma Pasta is going to feed you and Great Lakes is going to buy you your first beer. And everybody listening is invited. There's no ticketing. There's no RSVP. You show up at Great Lakes Brewery June 27, 6 to 9 p.m. for TMLX 15. You got it. And wait, one more gift here before we get you out of Montreal. I'm just letting Paul McCartney finish in the background. Okay. You mentioned your finances are in order, and that's why you are able to retire. So I don't know, you said you have a person doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you have a person doing it, and some people listening are doing it themselves, there's a wonderful free podcast that has best practices and great tips, and it's just wonderful advice. It's called the Advantaged Investor Podcast. It's from Raymond James Canada, and I urge you, Simon, to subscribe.
I'll have to take my wife's advice on this. As you know, she is a business reporter. She is our business manager, and I leave all the financial stuff
Smart.
to him. I've got hair and teeth. She's got the brains.
Will she make a Toronto Mike debut at some point?
I bet she would. Perhaps once she retires, I'm sure she would. Now, she's from Montreal, so she could tell you even more stories about Montreal. And I have a couple of really good Montreal stories when we get to the CBC portion of this, Mike.
Okay, amazing. And is she a Habs fan by any chance?
She's not a hockey fan. She constantly says to her girlfriends, "Why did I marry a puckhead?"
So how are you feeling? I know you're an Etobicoke guy, so I'm going to assume you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan.
I am. I followed this damn team since 1969, and every year I shake my head.
Well, timelines are funny, so we can't, because normally we would talk about what's happening tonight, but then no one will hear this till later. This is all very complicated, so it's difficult to speak about. But it is interesting being a Leafs fan because I'm also a diehard Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And in my lifetime, Simon, because I'm a titch younger, I can tell you I've never seen my team advance beyond the conference final. So I've never seen my team play in the Stanley Cup final.
Me neither.
So, yeah, you're not much, yeah. So you have no memories of 1967.
No, I didn't. I got into hockey in 1969, and I've followed it almost religiously since, but the loss to Montreal in the play-ins in 2021 was devastating for me. I was really angry at them. I still am, and obviously I don't want to date this, so I won't say what's happening.
Yeah, well, it just, Google it, everybody. Will there be a game? I got to do the math on this. Yeah, so just to be clear, so we're recording this, and then it's going in the feed a few days later. So we know the Leafs, as we speak, I can tell you, because we're no bullshit here, we're down 3-1, and we're going back to Boston. Knowing my Toronto Maple Leafs, because Tuesday night is Game 5. Did the Leafs force a Game 6? Knowing my Toronto Maple Leafs, we would win that game in Boston, and then we'd blow it at home in Game 6. This is how the Leafs operate.
Yep.
So who knows? We'll see what happens. It's exciting to know that we're being heard after the fact. We don't know what's going to happen. Stay tuned, everybody. Okay, so Simon. Oh, okay. I did tell you to subscribe to the Advantaged Investor. Jeannie's going to make her Toronto Mike debut at some point. That's exciting. But I do have a wireless speaker for you, and that QR code will actually have you subscribe to Yes, We Are Open, which is a excellent podcast from Monaris.
Thank you very much.
Monaris are only at Islington and
I know
Bloor.
what they are, yes, and I know what Monaris is, yes.
Yes, and they have a podcast called Yes, We Are Open, where FOTM Al Grego, he travels the country and he collects inspiring stories from small business owners, and he delivers them to you in Yes, We Are Open. And season 6 is dropping now, and the latest episode is people from a good small business in Canmore, Alberta. So he went out west this time, and these stories are inspiring and interesting, and Al does a great job. So subscribe to Yes, We Are Open, and you can listen to it on your new speaker. You're going to love it.
I appreciate it. I'm going to take it to Mexico with me. My wife and I are going there later this week.
Amazing. Okay, how long are you in Mexico for?
10 days.
See, I go to Montreal, you go to Mexico. This is the life you're living. Okay, I'm jealous. Okay, so tell me, what is after Montreal, CTV Montreal?
Global Toronto. I was there almost 5 years, and I'm still friends with many of the people I work with there. Tremendous cameramen, great group of reporters. There's a friend of mine, Avis Favreau, who used to work for Global and CTV. Avis said it this way. She said, you may work in better newsrooms, you may go higher in your career, but you'll never meet the same quality of people that you do at Global Toronto. And she was right. Nice.
And you're at Global when the collapse of the Meech Lake Accord happens in 1990.
Yes.
Tell me about, you were covering that with Global?
Global had sent me back to Quebec. I had just come to Toronto from Montreal, and the Meech Lake Accord collapses. And for the kids who are listening, it was a big political thing, let's put it that way. Right. So my cameraman, Yoram Paratsky, and my editor, Tom Bolt, and I all went to Quebec for 3 weeks. And it was a very traumatic experience. You could tell there was anger in the streets, and especially for an English TV crew. One anecdote: we had people make the odd comment to us because they could tell we were from Ontario. And I was in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, and my cameraman was shooting my stand-up. And I was doing it in English, of course. And I saw this older gentleman walking towards us, and I thought, oh my God, he's going to yell at me. He's going to tell us to get the hell out of here. And I'll never forget this, Mike. He came up to my cameraman and I, and he said in English, "Please tell the people of Canada we love this country."
Oh, Simon.
I know.
You're making me cry over here.
I've never forgotten that. And
Wow.
and I shook his hand, and I switched to French, and I thanked him very much for his kind words. And I've told that story forever. And he told me later on that he said, "Not everybody here wants to break up this country. We're Canadians first." I've never forgotten that, Mike.
Wow, especially because you're braced to be yelled at, right?
Yeah,
Like, so that's
yeah.
you're ready to be yelled at by this gentleman, and
Yeah.
to hear that sentiment expressed, you just want to weep, right?
If I can just tell a couple of more Quebec stories.
course.
When I was at CBC in 1995, the Quebec referendum was on. It was the most emotional story of my life. And two little anecdotes. It looked bad for Canada. The polls said that Canada was on the verge of breaking up. And the day before the vote, there was a big rally in a place called Place du Canada, which is in downtown Montreal. Tens of thousands of people flew in from across the country to proclaim their love for one country, for Canada. Anyway, I was doing reporting in the square in Place du Canada, and I felt this tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and it was a friend of mine, John Muse, who is married to former global reporter Marlene Trotter. And I said, "John, what are you doing here?" And he said, I think his words were, and I'm sorry, Mike, I get emotional.
That's okay.
He said, I can't watch my country break apart. He got up at 4:00 in the morning. He woke his daughters up and said, "Get in the car. We're going to Montreal to fight for our country." I've never forgotten that. I interviewed him, I believe, and I told the story on air.
Yeah.
It was just incredible to see that he'd done that. He hadn't even told his wife that he was leaving. He left her a note, and he said, "We have to fight for Canada."
See, never apologize for emotion. It's really what I find I crave these days, like the humanity of it all. Like, you're covering these events, and you're covering the Quebec referendum in 1995, and to be honest, I don't think we want you to be a robot.
Good, yeah. If I can give you another story.
Yeah, love it.
That night, my cameraman, Randy Shedlowich, who I'm still good friends with to this day, he and I had shot our story, and we sent the footage back to Toronto for editing. And he said, "Hey, let's get a beer." And we went to the famous Peel pub in Montreal. But we'd put our camera gear away in the hotel. Anyway, as we were having a beer, I was feeling very down, Mike. I thought, oh my God, my country's about to break up. And because I'd lived in Quebec and, of course, in Toronto, it had special meaning to me.
Sure.
And the music was blaring in the Peel pub, and I was feeling, all of a sudden, the door bursts open, and a group of young people come in, waving Canadian and Quebec flags and singing in English and French, "O Canada."
Wow.
And they stood up on tables and chairs, and they were singing so loud they drowned out the music, and waving the flags. And I got very emotional, and I looked at my cameraman, Randy, and unfortunately, no fault of his, we had put our camera away so we couldn't film it. It was one of those moments where you wished you'd had a camera, and we just didn't have it. And this was before cell phones with cameras were a thing, but it was an emotional moment, and I'll never forget, people were crying in the pub, singing "O Canada" over and over in English and French.
I'm getting chills, man.
Thank you.
Love these. I'm getting chills. I love these. And that referendum, correct me if I'm wrong, but 49.9 to 50.1. Is that how I remember it?
I believe it was less than 1%, 50.1 or 50.3. It was very close. We were on the edge of our seats that night. I remember being at the CBC headquarters in Montreal, and I don't mean to drop names here, but all the big shots.
No, I want you to drop names. Remember the orders? Come on.
Yeah, all the big CBC network people there, Peter Manzarich, Wendy Mesley. And I remember looking at Wendy Mesley in the hallway, and she had a distraught look on her face. And we knew this was going to be close.
And it couldn't have been closer. And Yeah, well, the rest is history.
Yeah.
And you're part of this history. You were covering that so you're covering that for CBLT. That is the
Yes, that's right.
Toronto CBC affiliate, if you will. So how did you end up at the CBC? Because you were at CTV. Global. You were at Global, right?
Global
CTV,
Toronto.
Global. Now you got to collect them all, right? You're
Yeah.
like, it's like Pokemons, collect them all. So how do you end up at CBC?
I wanted to make a change because I knew I loved working at Global. As I mentioned, the people were great, but I realized there was only so far I could go. And I was never going to get a chance to anchor there. And I'd always dreamt of working for CBC News, Mike. Growing up, I'd watched a TV program called News Hour. The host was Hillary Brown, and I realized that the stories they got to cover went a little bit deeper. Also, of course, I grew up watching Knowlton Nash on the National, and then Peter Mansbridge, of course. It was where I always wanted to work. So I actually took a $6,000 pay cut to go from Global to CBC, and I don't regret it. It was the best thing I could do because going to CBC allowed me to do things like documentaries and big stories. I reported at a national level. I worked for Hockey Night in Canada. I worked for CBC Sports. I worked on CBC Radio as well as a fill-in. I was never a regular there, but I filled in. It just gave me so many opportunities. So it was a no-brainer move, even though I was taking a bit of a pay cut. But to me, it was worth it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
And money's not everything.
No. And I mean, the experiences I've had at CBC have been tremendous. I could have stayed at Global and just continued to be a local reporter. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just wanted to do more before my career ended.
All right, here's a little bit of the tale of the tape, Simon. You ready? Okay. So you filed more than 150 stories as a reporter for The National and several hundred for the CBC Evening News.
Probably thousands.
Right. You're being shortchanged there. Absolutely. And then, so what were you doing with Hockey Night in Canada?
I was a producer on a segment called The Headliner. Scott Oak was the reporter. And so what I would do is fly to whatever the feature player was, we'd fly to that city, and I'd shoot what we call the B-roll or the pictures beforehand. And then Scott, who was the host of The Headliner, would come in and do the major interview.
That must have been, for a hockey fan like yourself, that must have been like an ideal, because you're covering such heavy stuff, right? You know,
yeah.
Think about what you covered in your career, and then you get to play in the toy department for a little bit.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Wow. Okay, but enough about Mad Sundin here. Okay, so just now so it's 1994 when you join CBC Evening News in Toronto. Is that right? I think it's 94. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, we just touched on hockey, so I'm going to ask you a bit more about hockey, because you covered 3 Stanley Cups, right? Mm-hmm. Which cups? Do you remember who won these cups?
Yes, I did. Actually, it may have been 4. I'd forgotten one. As a rookie radio reporter, I got sent to cover the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Islanders. I think that was 82, I believe. When they were in the Stanley Cup final. I think that was 82. I was a radio reporter. And then Tom Harrington, friend of Toronto.
FOTM, Tom Harrington?
Tom Harrington.
From the Tommy Hunter show?
Yes, he's a legend.
Can you give me Tommy Hunter? He's still with us.
I don't have his contact.
Okay, with him and Marilyn Bell, you're going to work on those. Okay.
But Tom and I worked together a lot, and he was the reporter, and I was the producer most of the time. And we covered the Stanley Cups where Detroit and Pittsburgh faced each other 2 years in a row, and that was a tremendous experience. And then
is that Crosby's first cup?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and
09 maybe or something. Yeah, like that.
And it was funny. There was a cameraman with us who was a big Detroit Red Wings fan, and he was so nervous. And we had a ticket for him in the press box. He wouldn't use it. He paced around the arena. This is Frank Piscitelli, a former CBC cameraman, and big Red Wings fan. He wouldn't come in the building because he thought he would jinx the Red Wings.
Okay, so just yesterday we were watching some of the game from Nashville, and did you see this Canucks comeback yesterday? Did you catch
No, I
did
this? Not. No,
unbelievable. Like, they're down 3-1 with a few minutes left, and they pull the goalie because they need 2, so they pull it early. They get 1 pretty quickly, and then the way they tie it up to force overtime was like I think 6, 7, 8 seconds left. This great goal. And then they win it like super early in overtime. They end it. Just great game. But in Nashville, they were drinking beer. Someone was drinking beer. A fan was drinking beer out of like a fish. Okay.
I saw the still photo. I
Okay.
did. I wondered,
Right.
what the hell is that?
Well, then, so I'm watching this, and I got like the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old are in the room, and then I start telling them the story of the Detroit Red Wings and the octopuses,
Yes.
or octopi, I suppose it is. And I'm explaining like, oh yeah, back then you had to win 8 games, and there's 8 tentacles, and I'm giving the whole story. So shout out to the Detroit Red Wings, who I was always that team because Brendan Shanahan were on a bunch of those teams, but Steve Yzerman, like they were such strong teams. I'm thinking Zetterberg and Datsuk, and man, they were
Powerhouse.
That was a powerhouse, yeah. And who's the great defenseman?
Swedish player.
Yeah, Lindstrom. Something Lindstrom, right?
Lindstrom.
How soon we forget. But man, that's what the Leafs are missing. Okay, where's our Lindstrom? Like I feel like take him, and I'm not. No, I saw Marner played better in Game 3 and 4, and he scored the only goal in Game 4, and it was a great goal actually. But to get a Mitch Marner, because you got to give up something to get something. So let's take this offensive gem, Mitch Marner, and if we could turn him into, I'm not saying you can get a Lindstrom. People who have Lindstroms don't give them away or whatever, but a Norris candidate type blue liner. Like I feel like that's the kind of move we got to make at this point.
Nick Lidstrom was an amazing defenseman.
Unbelievable. And we never, it was Salming in the 70s, and then I'm thinking, we've never had a guy kind of like that. And that might explain the drought here.
Yep.
All right, look, I'm just depressed. We don't know. Maybe the Leafs came back and won this series in 7, and maybe we're on our way. What do we know? We
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Okay, and you also covered, of course, Grey Cups.
Yep.
And the Olympics.
Yes,
Beijing, right?
The Olympics. That was the other major highlight of my career. Spending a month in China and covering the Olympics was outstanding, and I'm very grateful CBC sent me. There's no experience like it, and it was the only Olympics I got to cover, but I'm thrilled I was there. And originally, Mike, you got to remember, Beijing was up against Toronto for the 2008 games.
I remember.
And I was hoping Toronto would get it. And little did I know at the time that, no, it'll actually work out better for you if it's in Beijing, because I got sent to China and saw quite a bit and experienced Olympic reporting, which is really something.
First time I got excited about hosting an Olympics was the 96. I thought Toronto had a good shot at 96, but I guess we didn't have Coca-Cola here.
No, we did not. The fix was in.
So shout out to Donovan Bailey, though, who delivered in Atlanta.
Yes.
So the 2 gold medals. By the way, did you know Ben Johnson was here last week?
No, I did not know that. I've interviewed Ben a few times, yes.
So we had 100 minutes. He sat where you're sitting right now. This is last Monday. He came in with Mary Ormsby.
Oh, Mary. She's a friend of mine, too.
Okay,
Yep.
so you know Paul Hunter.
I do indeed, yes. And that's not the CBC Paul Hunter.
Yeah,
This is Paul Hunter, who used to be with the Toronto Star.
Yeah, that does get confusing. There's too many Paul Hunters.
Both
there.
Mary and Paul are tremendous journalists.
Oh yeah, no doubt, absolutely. And she, for a short time, she hosted a show on both the Fan and Fan, and I think it was 1430 at the time.
That's right.
I actually have the. This is from Scott Metcalf. He gave me an old Fan 1430 mic flash thing here.
If you were in my basement, my apologies for interrupting.
No, interrupt anytime, man.
I've got a bunch of mic flashes from all the stops in my career, radio and TV. And recently, a friend of mine even gave me one from my Hockey Night in Canada days, which I never got for whatever reason.
Amazing. You gotta keep that stuff here. All right, so Grey Cubs, Beijing. That's amazing. You were in Beijing. That was 2008.
Yes.
But you've been deployed to some. You're not just based here in Etobicoke. You've been to Washington, London, Mexico City, Ottawa, Quebec, Alberta. You got to travel the world on our dime. What's going on, Simon?
I'm very grateful, and they were all for news stories, of course. As I said, Beijing was the big one. But yeah, I was in Ottawa last summer working with our Parliament Hill Bureau. I was in Mexico many years ago for CBC Sports, shooting a documentary on an athlete named Nicole Forrester, a former Olympian. I've been worked out of New York. Sorry, I'm trying to remember London. This was a highlight, and I must thank my former boss, Leanne Elliott. She sent me to London in 2019, and it was an outstanding experience. We were covering Donald Trump as he visited the Queen at Buckingham Palace.
I remember, right.
And I was also at 10 Downing Street when there were rumors that former British Prime Minister Theresa May was about to resign. So here I am, this kid from Etobicoke, standing out front of 10 Downing Street. The most interesting thing, Mike, is I was in Trafalgar Square, and my mother came from Glasgow, Scotland, and she'd always talked about being what they call a Wren, the women's service and of the military. And she she had told me stories about standing there all day in the heat with a box of raisins. That was all she could eat. That was all they were given.
Wow.
So I called her from Trafalgar Square, and she didn't know I was there. And I said, guess where I am? I'm standing in Trafalgar Square. And that meant a lot to her that I was where she had been back in the early 1940s.
So I know you can't name everybody, but maybe as we, you exit CBC after 3 decades here, I mean, obviously your wife is still working at CBC, but who will you miss? I don't want you to give me the ultimate list, but are there any people still at CBC that were absolutely great mentors or great friends or great help?
Friends mostly, and I hope to stay friends with them still. As you mentioned, Tom Harrington, of course. All of the cameramen, most of them I'm pretty good friends with. The editors too. I'm trying to think. It's mostly the reporters and producers that I've been friends with. There's just so many to mention. Yeah, there are just so many to mention, and I learned from each and every one of them, Mike. I must say, there's one gentleman I'd like to mention who's passed away. Mike Odrowski was a cameraman I worked with at Global. He later went on to join CBC in Charlottetown. He and I were the closest of friends. He, not only was he was a tremendous cameraman, but an even better person. And unfortunately, we lost him back in 2017 or 2000. I'm sorry, maybe 2016.
I'm sorry. Sorry for your loss.
He was well known in the Toronto media, and it was just a tremendous cameraman.
I'm glad you're remembering him here for sure. Here. What are you doing May 12th, my friend? Are you going to be in Mexico on May 12th?
Yes.
Okay, so you got a good excuse. You won't be at Christie Pitts, but let me just give you a gift here. This book.
Oh, Jack Domenico's.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the history of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball, and they play their home games at Christie Pitts.
Yes. I've been to Christie Pitts, obviously, but never watched a game there.
I got to get you out because once a month throughout the season, so the season runs through August, and it starts May 12th. But once a month, I'm literally going to pack up my podcast studio, throw it in a box, throw it in a trailer, and bike it to Christie Pitts and set up there.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, once a month. And I will announce the dates soon, but one date I can tell you now is you won't be around, but I will be at Christie Pitts May 12th for the home opener. And here are some of the people. A lot of these people I've arranged to have come out to the game. Some of these people were not arranged by me. So I will tell you, I'm looking at a picture of Wendell Clark here. He's going to be there. So Wendell's going to be there. Rick Vive is going to be there.
Big names.
These are big names, absolutely. I've got Rick Emmett coming from Triumph. I know you're a Beatles guy, but Triumph, big Toronto. Second best, after Rush, I guess you got Triumph.
I'm going to say something controversial. Yeah. I am not a Rush fan.
I don't think that's, why? That's a polarizing sound. Like, I think that's a common reaction, actually. Like, I think everyone in my family, they can't stand Geddy's voice, for example. Yeah. I think that's a band you either love them to death or they're not your cup of tea.
I have tremendous amount of respect for their talent, and I'm told they're great guys. It's just not my type of music. But they're international superstars, and I'm proud that they put Toronto on the music map. So here's to Rush.
There's a band maybe you don't even remember. There was a band called Brighton Rock.
Yes.
Out of Niagara Falls.
I do know them because of Bruce Barker.
Okay.
Bruce had connections with the band, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the gentleman's name who passed away, the lead singer.
Jerry McGee,
and I know Bruce and he were very good friends.
Okay, so Bruce, by the way, Bruce would connect the band with Toronto Blue Jays, who are big fans, and the two Blue Jays that Bruce Barker connected to the band Brighton Rock. I just did a deep dive into Brighton Rock on the weekend with Greg Fraser, who's a founding member and the guitarist. But the two Blue Jays were Dwayne Ward. I'm trying to remember. Dwayne Ward and Pat Tabler.
Oh, yes, that's right. Pat Tabler, yes, right. Yeah.
Big Brighton, they would do backup vocals on Brighton Rock tracks.
And Bruce sang with them too, right? Am I right about that?
I think he'd be on the background too. Yeah. Like he was I've seen a photo of all these guys together at Metalworks.
Shout out to Brewster.
Yeah, he's an FOTM too. Yes. So it's all coming full circle here. And that's the second episode. Well, not in dropping order, but recording order. That's the second episode in a row where Bruce Barker got shouted out. So I think he's enjoying this for sure. But where was I going? Oh, yeah, Blue Jay Baseball. So just a couple more names I'll show. Steve Pakin's going to be there.
I know Steve.
Mike Eppel.
Yes, I know Mike.
You like Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Who doesn't?
That's true, actually. I love this guy. And he's listening right now. So hello to FOTM, Mike Eppel. Lots of Lots of good. Blair Packham from the Jitters is going to be there. Shout out. Oh, Stephen Brunt, who is a Hamilton guy I was
yes.
hanging with on Friday night.
I know Stephen. Yes, he's Stephen, well-respected journalist, and I'm happy to say I gave him a tiny bit of help when he produced his book on Jordan Tutu, because I had produced a documentary at the CBC on the Tutu family. So yeah, much respect for Stephen Brunt.
Well, he's very good at his craft, and I'll be seeing him on May 12th. And Mark Hebscher.
Yes, Hebsy. Yes, yeah, worked with him at Global.
Yeah, of course.
He's a character.
Yeah, Hebsy, Sportsline was my lifeline for a while there. I loved my Sportsline with Jim Taddy and Mark Hebscher.
Yeah, he's ask him to tell you about the time next time you talk to him, and I don't want to steal his thunder, he danced with Leon Spinks' wife in front of Leon Spinks, and I'll just tease it that way.
Tease it that way. I will ask about that for sure. What's interesting is that I bought it in 1992. It's a Doug Gilmour jersey when he was the assistant captain, because Wendell was the captain. Assistant. I always call it assistant. I've been calling it assistant my whole life. It's alternate is what the A stands for. I've always called it assistant.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah, it's alternate.
Alternate. Yeah, you're
Apparently
right.
I've been wrong my whole life.
Yeah,
okay.
they're two different words.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, I have this Gilmour jersey, and Hebsy was over here. This is just in January, and he's like, I'm gonna go see Doug Gilmour next, because he's gonna go west to Doug Gilmour. And I'm like, he goes, I'll get something signed for you. So I gave him my Doug Gilmour jersey to sign, and then Gilmour signed it, but I haven't got it back yet.
Oh.
Like, I wanted to wear it for the playoffs, but it might be a blink and you miss it playoff series. I still got it. So Hebsy, maybe on May 12th you can bring me my Doug Gilmour jersey now that it's signed by the Killer. Okay. So a lot of people. So what I'm telling is everybody should come to Christie Pitts at 2 p.m. on May 12th. No ticket required. Just come to Christie Pitts and then say hi on the mics, and that'll be awesome. And you got the book there.
Thank you.
And last but not least, recyclemyelectronics.ca. That's where you go, Simon, if you have a drawer full of old cables, old electronics, old devices. You don't throw that in the garbage. You go to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, and then the EPRA will say, oh, here's where you got to go to drop that off to be properly recycled so the chemicals do not end up in our landfill. You got a lot of homework assigned to you today, but you're doing great. Okay, so here we are, home stretch. You mentioned Beijing, but is there any other story you covered for CBC that maybe you could share a story or two about?
Oh boy, there's lots of them.
Like your favorite, like other than Beijing in 2008, what was your favorite story that you covered for CBC?
The Quebec referendum. I've been involved in a lot of big stories. One I should mention. The TTC crash in 1995 at the Russell Hill Road, in which 3 people were killed and 30 injured. I was a local reporter at the time, and my boss told me, drop what you're doing, get up there. Yeah. And we went up there, and I was among the first there. And a tremendous act of generosity. In CBC, if a national reporter shows up, generally the national reporter would take over doing the stories for the national. But a reporter named Brenda Craig, who was the national reporter, said to me, no, you're here first. You've got a better handle on this than me. You do it. And I was allowed to continue reporting live on the national that night. Brenda went behind the scenes and gathered information for me and gathered interviews. And she had every right to what we call Bigfoot me, because she was the network reporter. I was just a local reporter. Right. And it was just a tremendously generous thing for her to do, to allow me to be the reporter on it. I've never forgotten that.
Amazing. The newsroom won't be the same without you, Simon. I've been told that by multiple people, and not just your family members. So you're going to be missed.
Thank you.
And it sounds like, you're off to Mexico. It sounds like you're going to do more traveling. What is the plan now that you're retired?
Well, I have to wait for my wife to retire, obviously, and I don't know when that'll be. But eventually we're hoping to do, a lot more travel, like most people, see places that we haven't seen. And I realize not everybody can afford to do that. We're very lucky. So I'm very excited about that. I don't know exactly where we're going to go, but definitely travel is at the top of the list.
Traveling is on the top of the list. What about seeing more concerts?
I go to the odd concert here and there. The last one I went to is somebody you may not even know, Michelle Pagliaro.
Of course I do. Okay. In fact, Michael Williams just, I think the day he was here, he was on his way to, I think El Macombo, I think it was, but he was going to announce him on stage.
The Phoenix.
The Phoenix?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Michael
last
Williams.
September.
Okay.
And I was there with a good friend of mine, Mike Cancelera, who is a media person as well.
You know who I know from Twitter? I get notes from Mike Cancelera. Hello, Mike.
Mike, for your listeners who don't know, Mike was a reporter at CFNY. He's now one of the main news writers at CTV National News. So he's kind of a big shot.
Well, maybe I should get Mike on the show.
You should. He's tremendous. And
But that's too easy for you to get me, Mike.
I could tweet him right now and
all
say,
right, Mike,
get over.
send me an email. Well, let's get you in the calendar here.
So
I'm
Mike and
feeling
I were at Michelle Pagliaro last September. So I don't go to a lot of concerts anymore.
Wasn't he on Tears Are Not Enough, Michelle Pagliaro?
I don't know.
Okay.
He might have been. I don't know. It was recently I saw somebody had posted a list of the 20 greatest Canadian rock acts.
Yeah.
And they're all Anglophone groups. Not one was from Quebec where there was...
Not even Gino Vanelli.
No. Well, maybe he counts as an allophone,
Right.
neither English nor French. But
Right.
what I'm saying is that not Offenbach, not The Box, not Michel Pagliaro.
goodness.
And it just showed a lack of knowledge about the Quebec music scene.
But I noticed this, a gentleman passed away from cancer, I think it was last year, and they were talking about how this was the French-Canadian Gord Downie.
Yes.
Was how he was being described. And I dove in, and I realized I knew nothing about the band. I knew nothing about this guy, but absolutely beloved in Quebec.
Yeah. When you live in Quebec, you hear a mixture of English and French. And, my favorite music station there was Chaume FM.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine, Terry DeMonte, was the morning show host there.
I know Terry, yeah.
He's a big star in the radio world.
Right.
And it's funny, you live in Toronto, you move to Montreal, and you hear, you're listening to Chaume FM. Vous écoutez l'Esprit de Montréal, Chaume FM. And they would have bilingual programming. It was really interesting.
Steve Anthony was there for a bit.
Yes, he
I
was.
know, because he talks about when Corey Hart walked in and called him, because I guess he was in a glass box at Showham. I don't know what the studio looked like, but Corey said, called him the boy in the box.
Oh.
And the rest is history.
I did not know that.
See, fun fact, you can share that.
I'm not a Corey Hart fan, much respect him. My musical taste is the Beatles.
Well, let me hear more of your music on the way out here. So we
Sure.
established Beatles, okay?
Beatles,
what an obscure indie act that is. Okay, so the breaking news, CBC reporter
Likes the
Simon
Beatles.
likes the Beatles. Okay.
Early Genesis.
So Peter Gabriel
Yeah,
Genesis.
Foxtrot, Nursery Crime, that kind of thing. Led Zeppelin, The Who, Sade is one of my favorites, and I've seen her twice.
Sweetest taboo.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't sing Smooth Operator. Everybody, whenever they hear,
They're both the same song, aren't
yeah, well, that's what my wife says. All her music sounds the same, but whenever anybody mentions Sade,
they?
it's
Brings down the heart rate.
yeah, and she's got so much more than that.
Did you know Sade is the name of the group?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
because I dropped that mind blow on the reg, and people are like, I thought her name was Sade.
Sade Adieu is her name,
But the
but the band is also known as Sade. Yeah, and I've seen them twice here in Toronto.
Lovin' You Ain't Easy was covered by the Trans Canada Highwaymen, and I heard it performed live
Oh, wow.
on at Horseshoe Tavern last December, I think that was.
Oh, wow.
So even us pushing 50 youngsters are learning about Michel Pagliaro.
Oh, he's tremendous. And if your listeners haven't heard of Michel Pagliaro, he had a string of hits, not only in French, but also in English. Just on Spotify, just type in Michel, Michel, Pagliaro, and you might recognize some of the
and again,
songs.
English language hits here, because Lovin' You Ain't Easy is an English
Rain
language
Showers.
hit. Rain Showers, yeah, 1972.
Yep.
Some Sing, Some Dance. What the Hell I Got. What do you think of Alfie Zappacosta? Is he in your wheelhouse or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right. Oh, name check a few more on the way out. I'm curious what your jams are. Maybe at some point I'll get
Style
you over to-
Council, Paul Weller Style Council.
Did you listen to CFNY growing?
Never.
Back in
No,
the,
I did not. It was. I must admit the music was too eclectic for me. I grew up on 1050 Chum, got into FM, Chum FM, listened to Roger Ashby, then switched to Q107. So that's what I grew up with. But I'm not listening to those stations anymore.
No, you're listening to news now.
I've always listened to news. I've got a little device that I carry with me that everybody laughs about, Mike. It's a little device where I tape newscasts, and it's a recording device, and it's helped me cover stories. And people always see me walking around with headphones on or earbuds. I'm sorry, and they wonder they think I'm listening to music. I'm actually listening to newscasts.
You know, who's laughing now? That's what I would say. What a great career. Honestly, this is the hope for every, member of the media is that they get to leave on their own terms. Like nobody's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Time's up, Simon."
Yep.
You're going out on your own terms, and I love these exit interviews because they're happy, they're joyous.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me, Mike.
And I look forward to Jeannie Lee coming on to give the real talk on Simon Dingley.
She'll tell you the truth.
And I guess this will be when she retires, so it won't be for several decades. We'll have to wait and see.
She's only 27.
That's what I see. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Simon, how was your Toronto Mike debut?
It was a lot of fun, and I checked with a couple of people who you've had on before, and they said you're going to have a great time. It's lots of laughs.
Lots of laughs. And that... I'm actually not going to say a number, just so I can decide when I drop this, because it's a very rare episode that's not dropping immediately after we say goodbye. Although you do have to take a photo of me by the Toronto tree, as Dave Thomas calls it. So
Excellent.
Let me just say, and that brings us to the end of our show. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Toronto Mike. How can people follow you, Simon?
Well, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and the Gram, as the kids call it. Or, sorry, Insta. I've heard both. I was corrected. It's no longer called the Gram. The kids are calling it Insta now. So I'm on all three. And it's not just about news. It's my feed is about music, sports, sometimes politics. You know, I've covered the Prime Minister many times. I can't get into...
Who is your favorite Prime Minister to cover?
Oh, gosh. I've covered a lot of politics, so I don't want to say, because whoever I say, you'll be...
But you're retired now. It doesn't matter anymore.
No, they'll still... Yeah, all I can say is...
Retrospectively, they'll look back and say, look at the bias.
I'll tell you one thing, who a gentleman was, Joe Clark. I didn't cover him, but I've met him many times, and he
Joe
was...
who?
He is a gentleman, and much respect to Mr. Joe Clark.
Okay, beautiful. So follow Simon. Much love to all who made this episode possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, Palma Pasta, RecycleMyElectronics.ca, Raymond James Canada, the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, CMA 12, and Maneris, and Ridley Funeral Home. Simon, I almost forgot. I have a measuring tape for you, courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home. They're at 14th and Lakeshore.
Thank you very much. I could use this.
Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. See you all next week.